Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The golden sun of Lagos filtered lazily through the cream-colored curtains of their Ikoyi mansion as Amaka adjusted her wrapper and wiped her tear-streaked face in the bathroom mirror. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the growing weight of knowing she was forgotten in a home she built with sacrifice. That morning, she had overheard Damien on the phone in his office, laughing, excited, not the tired and cold version of him that grunted in her direction. "I want gold chairs, not silver. Sonia deserves to shine on that stage." "It's her day too," he had said. Her throat had dried. She didn't need a full explanation. Damien was planning to make their wedding anniversary into a platform for his mistress. Amaka clutched the sink tightly, blinking away tears. 7 years of marriage, and all she had to show for it were faded wedding photos and the empty ache of a miscarriage that still haunted her. Their mansion was a symbol of success, but to Amaka, it was a cage lined with marble floors and sorrowful echoes. Damien, once tender and charming during their courtship, had turned into a hardened man obsessed with image and public validation. The moment their first child died, a miscarriage brought on during a heated argument where he shoved her against the bedroom door. He blamed her. "You're not even woman enough to hold a child," he spat while putting on his wristwatch like he hadn't just broken her spirit. That night, she had bled into her anchor wrapper on the floor of the guest room because he locked her out of their bedroom. Her cries had been muffled by the sounds of him on the phone with Sonia, the same woman who now would sit on a throne beside him on what was supposed to be their sacred day. No apologies. No acknowledgement. Just indifference wrapped in designer cologne. Damien strutted past her in the corridor that morning, speaking into his phone. "Let the media come. I want it documented. We'll call it the New Era Celebration." The stab in Amaka's heart wasn't even sharp anymore, just a dull ache she'd learned to live with. He didn't greet her. He never did anymore. To him, she was a dull wallflower, a woman who had failed at childbirth and was now tolerated only because of appearances. But inside, something had changed. Something quiet and powerful had been brewing. This anniversary wouldn't end the way Damien expected. As he stepped into his Range Rover and drove off for meetings, Amaka went to her room, opened a secret drawer, and pulled out a neatly folded envelope marked Private, DNA. Her fingers brushed it like one might touch a weapon. The storm hadn't come yet, but the clouds were thick. It was time. The night was thick with silence, the kind that seeps into your bones when the person lying beside you feels like a stranger. Amaka sat at the edge of the bed in a dim blue nightgown, staring at the pale yellow walls that once heard whispered prayers and quiet laughter. Her eyes were swollen. It had become a nightly routine, crying when Damien wasn't looking, wiping away the shame that clung to her like a wrapper. She remembered when love meant comfort, when coming home meant warmth. Now, Damien would return in the early hours reeking of perfume that wasn't hers, toss his jacket across the armchair, and collapse on the bed without so much as a word. His silence screamed louder than his insults ever could. And the few times he did speak, it was to mock her. "You're lucky I'm still here. Any other man would have sent you back to your father's house by now." The memory of the miscarriage haunted her worst at night. 2 years ago, on a rainy evening, she had told him she was spotting, that she was scared, and begged him to come home. He shouted over the phone, accusing her of being dramatic and desperate for attention. When he finally returned hours later, drenched and irritated, she tried to hold on to him, literally. Her fingers gripped his shirt as she sobbed. "I'm bleeding, Damien. I think I'm losing the baby." He shoved her off coldly, muttering, "Always trying to ruin my peace." She collapsed on the tiled floor, the cramps shooting through her like fire. By the time she reached the hospital, the heartbeat was gone. Just like that. The life she had prayed for. The child she had sung lullabies to in secret. Gone. And Damien blamed her for it. He never visited the hospital, never held her hand, never mourned with her. Instead, he told everyone she couldn't carry it. "God knows I tried, but someone did come, and stayed." Dr. Tund. Amaka remembered his soft voice and gentle touch as he explained the procedure. His eyes were kind, not pitying, just present. He didn't ask invasive questions. He brought food the next day and simply sat beside her. They barely spoke, but in that silence, she found a strange sense of being seen. When Damien finally arrived to discharge her, he looked more annoyed than concerned. "Next time, don't stress yourself over nothing," he muttered. Amaka couldn't look him in the eye. She had already broken. But Tund had planted something in her, a reminder that compassion still existed. In the quietest corners of her suffering, someone had seen her humanity. She hadn't forgotten that. Dr. Tund was not the kind of man who imposed himself on people's lives. He carried a calmness that often made his patients forget their pain. And that day, when Amaka walked into his clinic again for a routine blood test, now visibly pregnant, he blinked back his surprise. "You're glowing," he said softly, before correcting himself. "I mean, it's good to see you again." Amaka offered a tight smile. Her glow was carefully painted, foundation to hide the latest bruise, gloss to distract from the sadness in her eyes. But something in her wanted to sit, to rest, to talk. And somehow, she found herself opening up. "He's excited about the child," she said. "Not about me, just the child." Tun nodded, listening as he always did. He didn't pry. He never had. But he watched her carefully. And this time he noticed the shadow on her neck, barely covered by a scarf. She tried to lie about it, saying she slipped in the bathroom. But Tund had seen too many cases not to recognize the truth. Still, he didn't challenge her. Instead, he asked gently, "Do you have someone to talk to? Anyone at all?" Amaka looked away, blinking rapidly. "No one would believe me. They all think I'm lucky to be married to him. They say I should be grateful." Her voice cracked. "Even after I lost our first child, they said I was careless, that I wasn't praying hard enough." Tund clenched his jaw, then softened. "You don't have to prove your pain to anyone," he said. "Not even me. Just know that you're not alone." She didn't respond, but her eyes said everything. That sentence reached places even she hadn't dared to enter in years. Months passed. She returned for every checkup. Damien never came with her, always busy with work or traveling. And each time Tund was there, he never overstepped, never confessed feelings. But he held her arm when her blood pressure was too high, got her medication himself, and even bought her pepper soup on the day she fainted in the waiting room. Slowly, without meaning to, Amaka began to breathe easier when she was around him. It wasn't romance, it was safety. Real human safety. And it was addictive for a woman who had only known fear inside her own home. Then came the day of the birth. Damien was in Dubai with Sonia. Amaka knew this because Sonia posted beach pictures with Damien's gold wristwatch visible in the background. It was Tund who drove her to the hospital. It was Tund who wiped her sweat, held her hand, and whispered, "You're not alone." When Junior came into the world, Tund was the first person to hold him. And something in that moment changed. Amaka sat on the edge of the hospital bed, cradling the newborn in her arms as the afternoon sun slanted through the louver windows, casting soft shadows on the tiled floor. Her eyes were tired, her body aching, but there was a quiet peace that filled her chest. The baby had her lips, her nose, but the dimples, the slightly upturned eyes, they reminded her of someone else. Tund stood nearby, adjusting the curtain, trying not to look too long. "He's strong," he said softly. Amaka smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. Damien had still not called. Not even a text. 3 days had passed, and still silence. She felt invisible. The man she had loved, served, sacrificed everything for, didn't even care that their child had been born. But strangely, she didn't feel lonely. Because someone had cared. Someone had stayed. And that mattered more than she could admit aloud. Tund noticed her glance, how her fingers trembled slightly. "You're safe here, Amaka," he said, almost in a whisper. "I'll always make sure of that." By the 4th day, Damien finally arrived. Loud, boastful, wearing sunglasses and a designer kaftan, flanked by 2 aides. He strode into the room like a man claiming property. "Where's my son?" he barked, barely sparing Amaka a glance. She motioned toward the baby, gently sleeping in the bassinet. Damien lifted the child for the camera, posed, and posted on Instagram within minutes. Welcome my legacy. DOJNR, the next king. Amaka watched from a hospital bed, numb. No, how are you? No, thank you for carrying this child. Just pictures. Just optics. He handed the baby to a nurse and turned to his aide. Organize the christening next week. Lagos Oriental. Sonia will coordinate the guest list. Her heart skipped. Sonia? Again? Even now? She didn't speak. She simply stared at the window, where the sun had now shifted into dull gold. Tund entered discreetly. Damien barely acknowledged him. Doctor, you can leave now. I've got it from here. Tund met Amaka's eyes, silently asking, Are you okay? She gave a small nod. He left, but his presence lingered like the scent of safety. That night, Amaka cried in silence as Damien snored beside her on the hospital couch, his phone still pinging with congratulatory messages from socialites, politicians, and distant relatives. None of them knew the truth. None of them saw the bruises on her back from the night he pushed her down the stairs. None of them knew that while she was throwing up from morning sickness, Damien was on vacation with Sonia in Mauritius. And now, the same man who neglected her through every stage of pregnancy stood proudly on social media, declaring his joy. It was nauseating. She looked at the baby, still sleeping, innocent and untouched by the filth of adult betrayals. A thought crossed her mind, briefly, then returned stronger. This child is yours, she whispered, brushing the baby's forehead. But not in the way you think. Her eyes drifted to her handbag. Inside, beneath layers of receipts and wipes, was a small envelope labeled Paternity Confirmation Private. She closed her eyes. Not yet. Not now. But soon. Weeks passed after the birth, but the atmosphere in Amaka's home grew darker, heavier, like thick clouds holding back a violent rain. Damien had resumed his routine, ignoring her presence entirely, treating her like a nanny for the child he now publicly claimed as his successor. Junior had everything: custom crib from France, a private nanny, a daily spa routine with imported baby oils. Damien beamed with pride when guests came over, often lifting the baby and saying, "This is my reason for waking up." Yet in the same breath, he would insult Amaka. His mother has no ambition, useless at managing anything except baby food. She never responded. She cooked. She bathed the baby. She smiled politely when Sonia entered the compound freely and waved at her. She collected it all, quietly. And every night, she documented everything. Damien had no idea that a small nanny cam was hidden in the corner of the nursery, capturing the many times he yelled at her, shoved her, or mocked her in front of guests. Every drop of abuse was becoming evidence. One day, after a particularly humiliating episode where Damien called her a glorified housemaid in front of his friends, Amaka left the house without a word and went straight to Tund's clinic. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. This time, from rage buried too long. Tund noticed immediately and offered her a glass of cold water. "Talk to me," he said gently. Amaka broke down, not with tears, but with words. She told him everything. About the night she bled on the floor, about how Damien never touched her unless he wanted a child, about how Sonia was now managing part of his company. Tund listened, hands folded, his expression unreadable. When she was done, he said nothing for a while. Then he stood, walked to his drawer, and handed her a printed pamphlet. "It's a women's legal rights NGO. I work with them quietly. They help women like you fight back. Safely." Amaka held the paper like it was a weapon. Something changed in her eyes. "I've been waiting to hear that for a long time," she said softly. Their friendship deepened. Not in romance, but in resilience. Tund became her quiet accomplice. He advised her on where to keep evidence, how to record safely, which bruises needed medical documentation. He never told her what to do. He simply made sure she had the tools to do it. And for Amaka, that made all the difference. One night, she brought Junior to the clinic with a mild rash. Tund held the baby gently and said, "He's growing so fast, and he has your strength." Amaka watched him cradle the child. A pang went through her chest. Was it guilt? Was it longing? She didn't know. But one thing was clear. This man, standing in simple scrubs and slippers, had given her more peace in 6 months than her husband ever did in 7 years. That night, she made a silent promise to herself. Damien had broken her body, her spirit, her womb. But he would never break her again. The anniversary was now 3 weeks away, and Damien was buzzing with excitement. The mansion was filled with decorators, planners, chefs, and media crews. "I want this to be the event of the year," he declared. "Everyone must know that Damien Okeke is in love with life." He winked at Sonia, who giggled, perched comfortably on the living room sofa, sipping wine like she owned the house. Amaka watched silently from the stairs, clutching Junior to her chest. Damien's audacity knew no bounds. He had named the event Rebirth of Legacy and insisted on gold-themed decor, with Sonia's image featured discreetly on the event flyer as strategic director. Amaka was instructed to look presentable and keep Junior quiet during the ceremony. The disrespect burned through her skin like acid. But she nodded calmly. "Yes, dear," she replied. Inside, her mind was a fortress, fortified by pain and planning. Damien had begun to use the child as a prop, posing with him at charity events, filming short clips for social media, even recording a fatherhood journey documentary where he praised himself as a modern, responsible African man. Amaka couldn't believe it. The same man who ignored her texts during labor. The same man who paid more attention to his mistress's Instagram stories than his son's first cough. And yet, to the world, he was Father of the Year. She let him shine, let him gloat, let him record. But every time he boasted, she quietly added another timestamp to her folder. Damien even called a press conference where he said, "This child changed my life. I see myself in him every day. His eyes, his hands. He is my legacy." The irony was cruel, because Amaka already knew. Those hands, those eyes, those dimples, they were not Damien's. Not by blood. That evening, Damien came into the bedroom and tossed a set of gold earrings on the bed. "Wear this for the event. Look good. Don't embarrass me." Amaka picked it up, nodded, and placed them in her drawer. He didn't notice the DNA envelope resting beneath her lace blouse. "And for God's sake," he added, "don't cry or act emotional. This is a celebration." She looked at him squarely. "Of course. We'll all be celebrating something that day." Damien didn't catch the double meaning. He was too busy texting Sonia. As he left the room, Amaka exhaled slowly. She walked to Junior's crib, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You're the only thing I did right, and the only one I won't let him destroy." Outside, the house buzzed with music, laughter, and decorations. But inside Amaka's heart, a storm was building. And when it finally broke, it would not just ruin Damien's celebration. It would dismantle his entire illusion. The house was quiet when it happened again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that wraps around pain like a shroud. Damien had just returned from a media interview where he boasted about his devotion to fatherhood and family values. And as usual, Amaka prepared his food. The aroma of egusi soup wafted through the house, but Damien walked in with a sneer. "This meat is dry." "Are you trying to kill me?" he snapped, tossing the plate onto the floor. The hot soup splattered against the tiled floor, scalding Amaka's legs. She winced, but said nothing. He stood up, pushed the dining chair violently, and stepped dangerously close. "You're lucky I even let you stay here. You should be thanking me every day," he hissed. Amaka looked up, her eyes blank, but she said softly, "You're right. I am lucky." Then she picked up the plate, her hands shaking not from fear, but from a deep, anchored resolve that had taken root inside her long ago. That night, after Damien had gone to Sonia's apartment, as he did almost every Thursday, Amaka went to the corner of the nursery and retrieved the small nanny cam she had bought discreetly months ago. She transferred the footage to a hidden flash drive labeled Junior's Baby Photos. On it were 6 months' worth of recordings. Damien yelling, slapping her hand, mocking her in front of the baby, insulting her womanhood, calling her a burden. She also had voice notes saved from when he threw her phone against the wall after she asked if he'd attend a school consultation. There were hospital documents too. Tund had helped her document everything. X-rays of her shoulder, written medical notes describing recurrent blunt force injuries, signed by Tund as attending physician. She photographed them and saved them to a hidden cloud account under a fake name, Chitara Yuzo. No one knew, not even Tund. This was her arsenal. And she wasn't just keeping it. She was organizing it like a war chest. In her free time, usually when Junior napped, Amaka started writing her personal journal, not in paper, but digitally, encrypted. It wasn't a diary of tears, no. It was cold factual. March 3rd. Sonia entered the compound at 2:20 p.m. Damien instructed guards not to log her name in visitor's record. March 6th. Damien returned drunk and threw my phone into the fish pond. It wasn't just cathartic, it was powerful. She was no longer the desperate woman begging her husband for attention. She was a woman calculating escape. She began saving small amounts of housekeeping money, secretly transferring them into a micro-savings account she had opened using her late mother's ID. 5,000 Nigerian nairas here, 10,000 Nigerian nairas there. Enough to cover legal filings, transport, and one good dress for the day she'd walk into court and destroy him. Damien saw none of this. To him, she was still the beaten-down housewife, glued to their home for lack of options. And Amaka let him believe it. Because the more he underestimated her, the sweeter her justice would taste. The more Damien elevated Sonia, the more vicious his disdain for Amaka became. Sonia was now referred to in staff meetings as Madame Sonia, and her decisions began to override Amaka's without question. Damien had transferred shares into her name, given her a company car, and now spoke of her as my partner, even in the presence of business associates. Amaka, once the sharp financial analyst who helped stabilize Damien's real estate company in its early years, was now nothing more than a glorified babysitter. Sonia would walk into the house, kiss Damien in plain view, and greet Amaka with a fake smile laced with venom. "Auntie, how's motherhood treating you?" she'd chirp. Amaka would smile back, always polite, always silent. But inside her, the fire was building. Not jealousy, not heartbreak, but something colder, strategic disdain. Sonia thought she was winning. Damien thought he was winning. But they were both playing a game Amaka had already mastered. It was during one of Sonia's business brunches at the house that Amaka overheard something she hadn't expected. She was in the hallway, carrying Junior, when Sonia's shrill laughter caught her ear. "Damien," she said, "you know I'm only sticking around for the shares and exposure, right? I'm not raising any child for you. That's not my brand." Damien chuckled. "That's why I have her," he replied, referring to Amaka. "As long as she keeps her mouth shut, I'm free." Sonia smirked. "You better hope she stays stupid." Amaka stood frozen. She walked back into the nursery and sat on the floor, her back against the door. The betrayal didn't sting. It confirmed what she had known all along. But this was another layer of insult. He had weaponized her motherhood, reduced her to a vessel of convenience. That night, Amaka copied the hallway recording into her growing archive. She didn't even cry. She just pressed save and labeled it, Mockery June. The staff had started noticing things too. The housemaid Nkechi often gave Amaka sympathetic glances but said nothing. The driver, Peter, once whispered, "Madam, your strength day humble person." Amaka only nodded. She didn't want pity. She wanted leverage. And every day, Damien gave her more without realizing it. When a journalist from Cityline magazine came for a feature on Damien's blended family success, Amaka played the gracious wife. She posed with Junior. She answered questions with humility. The next day, the headline read, "The power couple behind Dio Legacy Group, Damien and Sonia's new era." Amaka clipped the article, not because she cared, but because she knew the journalist would later testify about who gave the official family interviews. She was building a puzzle. Every piece was falling into place. And soon, the picture would be complete. Damien thought he was building a legacy. But he was walking into a funeral, his own, and he didn't even know it. It was raining softly the evening Amaka found herself sitting in Tund's clinic long after her appointment had ended. The baby had a mild fever, but it was already subsiding. Tund had given her medicine and, as usual, offered tea before she left. But today was different. Amaka lingered in the waiting room, Junior asleep in his carrier beside her. Tund noticed her hesitation. "Do you want to talk, or do you want me to pretend I don't see you unraveling?" he asked gently, crouching beside her. She chuckled bitterly, her voice low. "I'm tired, Tund. Tired of pretending. Tired of smiling for the world while dying inside. I don't even remember what love feels like." Her voice cracked, but she caught herself. "I feel like a shadow of who I was." Tund sat beside her, saying nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You don't need to be loved by anyone right now. You just need to be free." The words hit like thunder. "I don't know how to leave," she whispered. "He owns everything. The house, the cars, even my name. I've been Amaka Okeke for so long, I don't remember who Amaka Nwafor is." Tund reached into his drawer and brought out a white envelope. Inside were the contact details of a human rights lawyer. "Her name is Ifyinanya. She's discreet, fierce, and brilliant. I've referred patients to her before. You won't be alone." Amaka looked at the envelope like it was a loaded gun. Powerful, dangerous, final. "What if he fights back?" she asked. Tund leaned closer, his voice firm. "Then let him. But he won't win. Not with what you've collected. You've been documenting, right?" Amaka nodded slowly. "For almost a year." Tund's gaze didn't falter. "Then he's already lost." The room was quiet again, except for the distant rhythm of rain tapping on the window. Before she left, Tund walked her to the car. He didn't say much, but just before she opened the door, he stopped her. "Amaka," he said, voice hesitant but sincere. "I know you're not ready. I'm not asking for anything. But if one day you want peace, not passion, not drama, just peace, I'd like to be part of that." Amaka didn't reply. She just looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, someone's gaze didn't make her feel small. She got into the car, drove home, and stared at her sleeping son that night for hours. Junior stirred in his cot, his tiny fingers curled around a pacifier. She leaned in and whispered, "Mummy's almost ready." Almost. Just a little longer. The war was almost over. The anniversary was in 2 weeks. And the next time she stood in public, it wouldn't be as a forgotten wife. It would be as a woman reborn. The house was unusually loud that afternoon. Decorators walking around, event coordinators calling out instructions, and the compound buzzing with vendors preparing for what Damien was calling the Night of Legacy. Amaka stood at the upstairs balcony with Junior in her arms, watching quietly as they set up a massive golden archway labeled Celebrating Power, Progress, and Partnership. That word, partnership, rang in her ears. She turned to look at the email Damien had sent earlier to media outlets. In the press release, he listed the event as an unveiling of the new phase of his company, praising Sonia as a formidable force in business and life, and boldly ending the statement with, "It is time to live in the open, unapologetically." No mention of Amaka, not even as the wife who bore the child. Her chest was tight, not from heartbreak, but from sheer disbelief at the cruelty. Damien was truly planning to humiliate her publicly on their anniversary, and he was proud of it. Later that evening, Amaka was in the kitchen preparing Junior's food when Damien walked in wearing a champagne-colored caftan, his face lit with satisfaction. "Make sure you wear something classy," he said, not even sparing her a glance. "There'll be senators, socialites, and the press. Don't embarrass me. In fact, just hold the baby, smile, and step aside when I give my speech." She didn't answer. He scoffed. "What? Cat got your tongue?" She turned to him slowly, eyes calm. "Is this what you really want to do on our anniversary?" Damien laughed. "What I want to do? You're still acting like this marriage means something. Amaka, this is just optics. You're a formality. Sonia is my reality." Her hands tightened on the spoon she was stirring with, but she smiled faintly. "I see," she replied, then added, "Thank you." Damien frowned. "Thank me." She nodded, for making everything so clear. She returned to feeding Junior, and he walked out without another word. But behind that faint smile was a volcano preparing to erupt. That night, Amaka didn't sleep. She sat at her desk with her laptop open and all her files spread across the table. Audio recordings, CCTV stills, photos of bruises with medical annotations, video clips of Damien insulting her, Sonia mocking her, and Junior crying while Damien screamed in the background. She organized everything into folders, encrypted them, and sent backup copies to 2 secure emails, one for the lawyer Tund referred, and one to herself under a fake name. She also wrote her speech. Not the one she'd give on stage, that would be short and precise. This speech was for the court. She uploaded everything to a USB drive and sealed it in an envelope addressed to my future self, in case I ever forget my worth. She placed it beside her wedding photo on the shelf. She stared at the picture, young, bright-eyed, hopeful, and whispered, "You survived. But now you fight." When she finally lay down beside Junior, the boy stirred in his sleep and reached for her. She pulled him close. Tomorrow would be their last day living in pretense. After that, everything would change. The day dawned with golden skies and a deceptive calm, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Amaka stood in front of her mirror in a navy blue lace gown that hugged her waist and flared slightly at the bottom. Her geli was a soft silver that shimmered in the light, and her makeup was regal, elegant but not loud. Junior wore a tiny bata in matching blue, his curly hair brushed neatly, his tiny feet clad in suede moccasins. They both looked like royalty. Amaka stared at herself for a long time. It wasn't vanity. It was reflection. The woman looking back at her had endured too much to be here. And tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her name, her power, her peace. She whispered a short prayer over her son, kissed his forehead, and stepped out of the room. The mansion buzzed like a carnival. Cameras clicked. Reporters murmured. The main event tent was decorated in gold and ivory, and high-profile guests filled the seats in designer attires. Damien stood at the center of the crowd like a peacock in full display. He wore a white and gold bata, sunglasses perched on his forehead, and Sonia beside him in a glittering champagne gown, her smile wide and confident. When Amaka entered the garden with Junior, conversations paused. All heads turned. She walked gracefully, head held high, as if she owned the ground she walked on. Damien gave her a glance, smirked, and turned back to Sonia. "Let's begin," he said to the MC. The event kicked off with speeches about Damien's accomplishments, the company's growth, and then came the legacy tribute. Damien took the mic, his voice booming with pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you not just as a businessman, but as a man reborn. Tonight, I unveil the truth of my life, my strength, my support system, Sonia." Applause echoed, and Sonia walked forward as Damien kissed her hand dramatically. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Damien looked back at Amaka with arrogance. She gave a small nod and stepped forward. "May I speak?" she asked calmly. The crowd hushed. The MC hesitated. Damien, trying to play gracious, waved his hand. "Let her speak. Let the mother of my child greet you all." The microphone passed to Amaka. She stepped forward, looked at the crowd, then at Damien, and finally at Sonia. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "It has been 7 years of marriage, 7 years of silence, 7 years of endurance. But today I choose truth." She paused and gently placed Junior beside her in a stroller. "This child has been called a legacy. He has been posted online, held up as a brand. But no one ever asked about the woman who brought him into the world. The woman who was alone in labor while his father traveled. The woman who has been nothing more than a shadow in her own home." The crowd was silent. Damien's smile began to fade. Sonia crossed her arms, annoyed. Then Amaka opened the folder in her hand. "Since we are revealing truth tonight, let me reveal mine." And with that, she raised the DNA result in her hand. Amaka unfolded the paper slowly, her fingers poised but firm, the hush in the crowd thick enough to silence even the breeze. Damien's face contorted into a mix of confusion and disbelief. Sonia's smile froze. Amaka's voice rang clear, measured, and devastating. "This is a legally certified DNA test, conducted by a licensed genetic laboratory. The test was requested after certain medical discrepancies during the childbirth. She paused and locked eyes with Damien. The result states clearly that there is zero biological match between Damien Okeke and the child known as Damien Okeke Jr. Gasps echoed through the crowd like distant thunder. Someone dropped a drink. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Damien stepped forward, waving his hands. "What sort of nonsense are you?" he began, but Amaka raised her voice, still calm. "This child belongs to a man who stood beside me when you abandoned me, who held my hand through labor, who fed me when you starved me, a man who never touched me until I healed, a man named Dr. Tundalade." Damien exploded. "This is a lie, a setup. She's trying to disgrace me," he bellowed, lunging toward Amaka. Security guards quickly stepped in. Sonia stepped back, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. Amaka remained still. "You wanted a spectacle, Damien. Now you have one," she said, then turned to the guests. "But this is not just about infidelity. It's about abuse, about power, about a man who thought a woman was too broken to fight back." She signaled to her lawyer, who stepped forward and handed printed copies of evidence folders to selected guests and media outlets. In those documents are recordings, medical reports, CCTV footage, and financial transactions, all proving years of domestic abuse, infidelity, misappropriation of marital funds, and illegal asset transfers. Damien staggered backward, visibly shaking. "You think you can take everything," he whispered. Amaka looked at him with a serene expression. "You already gave it to me when you decided I was nothing." The garden had turned into a courtroom. The audience was now a jury, and Damien stood exposed, naked, not in body, but in pride. Sonia slipped away quietly, her heels clicking like a final verdict. Damien screamed after her, "You set me up." But she didn't turn. Amaka handed the mic back to the MC, who had no idea what to say. She returned to her child, lifted him into her arms, and walked away slowly through the center aisle. Not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a woman reborn through fire. Damien fell to his knees, hands gripping his head, eyes wide with disbelief. Guests murmured, some recording, others walking away. The empire he built on humiliation had collapsed in a single night. Amaka didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. Her battle was over, but her healing was just beginning. The mansion was no longer a palace, but a prison of echoing silence. The morning after the anniversary event, Damien sat alone in his luxurious living room, his once prized Igbata crumpled like a discarded rag at his feet. His phone buzzed incessantly, messages from business associates, family members, the press, and his lawyer. The headlines were everywhere. DNA bombshell at legacy night. Wife outs billionaire's lies during celebration. Junior not his son, domestic abuse evidence surfaces. He hadn't slept. His mind was spinning, fractured by shame, confusion, and rage. Junior, the boy he paraded, the boy he gave his name, not his, not his. That phrase kept repeating like a haunted chorus in his head. Not your son. He had bathed him, held him for photos, made promises to raise him into a man, and now he was just a stranger's child. His hands shook as he reached for a glass of whiskey and gulped it down without thinking. For the first time in years, Damien felt powerless. The world saw the truth now, and there was no going back. His house staff walked lightly now, afraid to meet his eyes. The chef avoided him entirely. His driver called in sick. Even Kechi, the maid who once feared him, dropped his breakfast tray like it was a bomb and fled. His kingdom was crumbling. Sonia hadn't called or returned his messages. Rumors were already flying that she had moved to Ghana. Damien's family WhatsApp group was on fire. His mother had sent long voice notes demanding explanations. His brothers mocked him in silence, only one of them sending a cryptic message. "You did this to yourself." And then there were the pictures. People at the anniversary had filmed everything. Amaka's calm delivery of the DNA results. His outburst. Sonia's walkout. Now his disgrace was meme-worthy. Someone had already edited the video with a high-life soundtrack titled Legacy Gone Wrong. Damien smashed his iPad against the marble floor, fragments flying like broken pride. He stood up and shouted into the empty house. She lied. It's all lies. But even he didn't believe himself anymore. When the press showed up at the gate, he had them chased away. But one question from a reporter pierced through the gates. Mr. Okeke, is it true you signed over property to a mistress while abusing your wife? That was the dagger. Amaka had submitted every document, every bank transaction, every forged signature, every chat thread that revealed how he sidelined her from company shares. He didn't even remember half of what he'd done. That was the problem with power. You think you're untouchable, so you stop keeping track of the damage. And now it had all caught up. By evening, Damien locked himself in his study and stared at a framed photo of Junior. For the first time, he cried. Real, bitter, soul-wrenching tears. Not because he missed the boy. No, he hadn't loved anyone but himself in years. But because he had lost control. And for a man like Damien, that was worse than death. Damien's descent into madness wasn't sudden. It was slow, ugly, and public. He started calling Amaka nonstop, his voice swinging between pleading and fury. Amaka, please, let's talk. Amaka, you won't get away with this. Amaka, that child is mine. I don't care what that paper says. She never picked up. She never responded. The silence drove him insane. He went from begging her to threatening her in a matter of hours. He even showed up at Tun's clinic one afternoon, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse. You think you can take my family, you poor excuse for a man, he growled. Tund, ever composed, simply replied, you had a family and you lost it. That's not on me. Security escorted him out. The video made it to the internet the next day. Disgraced billionaire confronts doctor in child scandal. Comments poured in. Damien Okeke had officially become a cautionary tale. His business partners began distancing themselves quietly. Calls went unanswered. 2 board members resigned from his company. One of his properties was seized in a government audit after Amaka's lawyers flagged inconsistencies in ownership transfer to Sonia. It turned out Damien had forged Amaka's consent signature on property documents more than once. The Financial Crimes Unit picked up the case. A letter was delivered to his gate. You are hereby invited for questioning regarding allegations of property fraud, document falsification, and financial abuse. Damien slumped in his living room. Everything he built was evaporating, faster than he could fight back. His empire wasn't just cracking, it was imploding. He walked to the nursery one night, now empty, untouched since Amaka left. He collapsed on the floor and wept until the cleaner found him at dawn, curled in fetal position on the teddy bear rug. The final nail came during the emergency divorce hearing. Amaka arrived in a simple but powerful black gown, her posture regal. Damien came disheveled, eyes sunken, beard overgrown. The courtroom was packed with press and legal observers. Amaka's lawyer laid out the evidence meticulously. Medical reports of physical abuse, financial discrepancies, leaked voice notes, nanny cam videos, and, of course, the DNA results. Damien's lawyer tried to object, but he had nothing to work with. The judge looked over the mountain of documentation and shook his head. Mr. Okeke, you've not only emotionally and physically abused your wife, but also attempted to erase her existence while parading a mistress and claiming false paternity. This court grants full custody to Mrs. Amaka Okeke, 65% of the marital properties, and imposes a restraining order. Damien lunged forward, screaming, she's ruining me. Bailiffs held him back. Amaka didn't flinch. She looked at him one last time and said quietly, you did that all by yourself. Then she walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind the ruins of a man who once thought he owned the world. The press had a field day for weeks. Damien's downfall dominated the front pages of every major newspaper in Nigeria. From empire to ashes, Damien Okeke's dirty truth. DNA revelation ends marriage and legacy claims. Wife wins landmark abuse settlement in high society divorce. Amaka's name was on every tongue, but not with pity. With respect. People hailed her as a silent warrior, a woman who played the long game and won. Survivors of domestic violence found courage in her. Women's rights groups applauded her. Even the Lagos State Family Welfare Office commended her for coming forward. Meanwhile, Damien's business suffered irreparable damage. His board of directors dissolved. His company's stock plummeted. Clients pulled out. Sponsors vanished. And one by one, his remaining houses were evaluated for liquidation. He sat in a law office one morning with trembling hands as a list of properties was read aloud. Banana Island Duplex, Victoria Island Penthouse, Lekki Phase 1 Showroom, all gone. Transferred. Or auctioned. His lawyer finally said, "Sir, you may need to consider bankruptcy." But Damien wasn't just losing wealth. He was losing himself. His reflection became unrecognizable. Haunted eyes, sunken cheeks, twitching fingers. He began walking the streets in a hoodie, hiding from cameras, snapping at strangers. Some said they saw him talking to himself in restaurants. Others said he began frequenting local bars, drinking alone, staring at empty bottles like they held the answers. When he finally returned to the mansion, what was left of it? He stood at the gate and stared up at the empty balcony. No wife, no child, no laughter, just echoes. He stepped into the nursery again and saw the photo of Junior still on the shelf. For a moment, he cradled it. Then he smashed it against the wall and screamed. He was mine. He was mine. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had lost not just a child, but the opportunity to ever be a better man. And that haunted him more than the legal losses. Amaka, meanwhile, had moved on quietly. She didn't give interviews. She didn't clap back online. She issued one statement: "I never wanted revenge. I wanted freedom. And now I have it." With Junior and the legal documents safely secured, she relocated to Abuja temporarily while working on establishing an NGO focused on helping women escape domestic abuse. Tund remained by her side, not romantically yet, but constantly present, supportive, grounded. He attended court hearings with her, offered silent strength, and helped care for Junior. When reporters finally caught up with her outside the courthouse asking, "What will you do now?" she simply smiled and replied, "I will live." And that is more than enough. Her story became a legend, told in whispers at dinner parties, dissected in seminars, respected by women across the country. And Damien? He became a warning, a perfect example of how arrogance, abuse, and ego can make a man rich, but never whole. The nights became Damien's punishment. He no longer slept. He merely existed through endless hours of darkness, pacing his once grand living room barefoot, muttering to himself. The mansion that used to brim with servants, laughter, and noise now echoed like a mausoleum. He would stare at the framed news article on the floor. DNA scandal. Billionaire loses everything to wife. He couldn't stop reading it. Over and over. Sometimes he tore it to pieces. Other times he pasted it back together with trembling hands, muttering, "Lies. All lies." His mind had split between rage and regret, and he no longer knew which voice was louder. He hadn't bathed properly in days. The once immaculate man, who wore gold cufflinks and silk caftans, now wore a torn t-shirt and trousers with stains of alcohol and dust. At night he heard echoes, Amaka's voice, calm and poised at the event, saying, "Junior is not your son." He'd jolt up from the couch screaming, "He's mine. You can't take him." But the walls never answered. Only the silence did. Neighbors began to whisper. Damien Okeke, the once celebrated tycoon, now wandered the compound at odd hours, shouting into the air. He spent his mornings by the gate, waiting for a car that never came, a Marcus. Every evening, he would stand near the old nursery window and stare at the crib through the glass. Sometimes he'd place one of Junior's old toys on the sill and whisper, "Come home, my boy." But no one came. His obsession grew worse when he discovered a Marcus NGO launch in the newspaper. The photo showed her standing beside Tund, dressed in a white lace gown, smiling serenely. That smile haunted him. It was the same face he had once mocked, slapped, and ignored, now radiating joy in someone else's company. He ripped the page in half and fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "You replaced me," he whispered. "You replaced me like I never existed." He slammed his fist on the floor. "You'll come back. You have to. But deep down even he knew she never would. His attempts to reach her bordered on madness. He called her dozens of times, all unanswered. He sent long voice notes that shifted between begging and threats. Amaka, please. I can change. Then seconds later, you'll regret this, you witch. The more she ignored him, the more he spiraled. He sold one of his last properties to fund a private investigator, hoping to track where she was living. But even that failed. The investigator returned after 2 weeks and said, "Sir, she's protected. She has court backing. You can't get near her." Damien slapped him across the face and screamed, "You're fired." That night, he sat by the poolside, staring into the water, his reflection distorted by ripples. He whispered to himself, "She was mine. Everything was mine." Then he began to laugh, loud, hollow laughter that echoed across the empty compound. That laughter was the sound of a man losing the last thread of his sanity. Life in Abuja carried a kind of peace Amaka had forgotten existed. The air was quieter, less judgmental. The house she rented was modest, a 2-bedroom bungalow with cream walls and an open veranda where she sat every evening with Junior. The city noise faded into soft hums of evening crickets. She would watch the sunset and feel something she hadn't felt in years, calm. After everything, the humiliation, the trial, the scandal, she finally had her life back. But healing wasn't instant. It came in fragments. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, remembering Damien's voice shouting her name. Other times, she'd see a gold wristwatch in the mall and freeze, heart pounding. But each day, the pain hurt less. Each day, she rediscovered parts of herself that Damien had buried. Her laughter came easier. Her smile returned naturally. And at the center of that rebirth was Tund, steady, patient, kind. He never tried to fix her. He simply walked beside her through her healing. Tund had moved to Abuja 6 months before her, setting up a new clinic in Garki. When Amaka arrived, he became her anchor in the unfamiliar city. He helped her settle Junior in school, arranged security discreetly, and even introduced her to people who supported her NGO idea. But beyond all that, he gave her space. He knew love born from trauma had to breathe before it could bloom. There were moments of awkward silence between them, unspoken feelings hanging in the air, but he never rushed her. One evening, after an NGO outreach, Amaka sat with him in his clinic's courtyard, sipping zobo. The air smelled of rain. "Do you ever think we deserve to be happy after everything?" she asked. Tund looked at her for a long moment before replying softly, "We don't have to deserve it, Amaka. We just have to stop running from it." She smiled faintly, blinking back tears. "You make it sound so easy." He chuckled. "It isn't. But it's possible." That night, when she got home, she couldn't stop replaying those words in her head. Weeks turned into months. Amaka's NGO, Voice of the Silenced, gained national attention. She began receiving invitations to speak at women's events. Her story inspired many, but she rarely mentioned Damien's name. He was a chapter, she'd tell reporters, but not my whole story. Junior was growing fast, curious, playful, always asking questions about his Uncle Tund. One evening, after Junior had fallen asleep, Amaka found herself alone on the veranda again, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Tund arrived, holding a small cake. "Happy 1 year since your freedom," he said. She laughed genuinely. "You remembered?" He nodded. "I remember everything that matters." As they sat together under the stars, silence spoke louder than words. For the first time since her marriage ended, Amaka didn't feel broken. She didn't feel angry. She felt alive. And in that quiet, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And love, real, patient, healing love, was finding its way back to her. It was a humid afternoon when Damien finally found her. He had been following rumors, whispers, online posts about her NGO's events. When a local paper announced Amaka's upcoming conference in Abuja, he boarded the first bus out of Lagos. He looked nothing like the man he used to be. His once polished appearance was replaced with rough stubble, torn clothes, and bloodshot eyes. The driver who took him to the event hall later said he kept muttering to himself, "She has to see me. She has to remember. When he arrived, security stopped him immediately. "Sir, do you have an invitation?" one guard asked. Damien glared at him. "I'm her husband," he spat. The guard, recognizing him from old headlines, radioed his superior. Within minutes, the news spread across the venue. Amaka's ex-husband is outside. But Amaka, standing backstage with Tund and other guests, didn't flinch when they told her. "Don't let him in," she said simply. "I have nothing to say." Outside, Damien grew agitated. "She can't ignore me." "I'm not done," he yelled, trying to push past security. The crowd began recording. Cameras flashed. The once respected businessman now looked like a madman shouting at locked gates. "Amaka," he screamed, "you planned it all. You turned my son against me. You destroyed me." The guards restrained him gently, trying to calm him down, but he struggled violently. "I made you who you are. You can't walk away." His voice cracked into sobs. "You were supposed to be mine." Inside, Amaka took a deep breath and continued with her speech as if nothing happened. Her voice didn't tremble. "To every woman who thinks silence protects her," she said into the microphone, "remember, your voice can rebuild your world. Speak. Stand. Rise." The audience erupted in applause. Outside, Damien collapsed to his knees. He could hear her voice echo faintly through the speakers, the same calm, resolute tone that once terrified him, because it reminded him of everything he could never control. By the time the event ended, Damien was gone. Security said he wandered off quietly after breaking down in tears. Amaka didn't ask where he went. She knew some ghosts had to die on their own. That evening, she drove home with Tund and Junior. The car was quiet but peaceful. As they reached her gate, she turned to Tund and said softly. He looked lost. Tund nodded. He always was. Power just hid it. She sighed, gazing out the window. "I pity him." Tund's voice was gentle. "That's how I know you're free." She smiled faintly and stepped out of the car, holding Junior's hand. The night was calm. The air smelled of redemption. And somewhere far away, under a flickering streetlight, Damien Okeke walked alone, clutching a torn photograph of Amaka and Junior, whispering her name until the words faded into the dark. His kingdom was gone, but so was his pride. What remained was a man haunted by what he destroyed, and a woman finally strong enough to never look back. The bungalow in Abuja became a sanctuary, not just for Amaka, but for the many women who came through its gates in search of freedom. Her NGO, Voice of the Silenced, had grown into a safe haven, a warm, pastel-painted space where pain was named, processed, and healed. Every morning, she'd walk barefoot in the compound with Junior, now almost 2, who giggled as he chased butterflies through the garden. Sometimes, the scars on her back ached in the cold, but they no longer controlled her. They reminded her that she had survived. She no longer lived in defense. She lived in purpose. Amaka began running support groups for survivors, hosting legal aid workshops, and training counselors. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was building platforms for others to rise from theirs. And as her strength grew, so did her joy. She wore her past like armor now, not as shame, but as testimony. Her relationship with Tund deepened in silence and sincerity. He never proposed with fanfare or flowers. One evening, while folding Junior's clothes after dinner, he simply looked at her and said, "I'm not here to replace anything you've lost. I just want to be part of whatever you build next." Amaka didn't answer immediately. She just looked at him, eyes soft, and whispered, "I want peace." And peace is what he gave her. They never rushed anything. They shared laughter, co-parenting, market runs, late-night TV shows, and weekend visits to parks. Tund helped Junior plant his first tree. He helped Amaka paint the walls of her NGO center. He never asked to be celebrated. Yet every room he entered seemed calmer because of him. Amaka's family finally came around. Her father apologized for his silence during her marriage. Her siblings, once distant, now visited regularly. They saw the new version of her, stronger, unbothered, whole. One Sunday morning, Amaka stood on the veranda watching the sunrise, her arms wrapped around a mug of warm tea. Junior sat beside her on a plastic stool, drawing on a notepad. He looked up at her suddenly and said, "Mummy, are you happy now?" The question caught her off guard. Tears welled up in her eyes, but not from pain, from gratitude. She knelt beside him and kissed his forehead. "Yes, my baby. Mummy is happy now." He smiled and returned to his scribbles. The birds chirped in the trees. The breeze carried the scent of roasted corn from the nearby street. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. No cameras, no drama, no applause, just stillness, just life. And in that moment, Amaka realized something powerful. The best revenge was not in what she took back from Damien. It was in the peace she built in his absence. She no longer needed to win. She had already won. In a dusty one-room apartment in the outskirts of Lagos, Damien Okeke sat on a creaking plastic chair, staring at a flickering TV screen. The former mogul had become a ghost, rarely seen, barely spoken of. His name had disappeared from headlines, his company long absorbed by competitors. The mansion in Ikoyi had been sold off in a foreclosure auction, stripped of all its gold-framed mirrors and imported Italian furniture. All that remained of his empire were a few newspaper clippings he kept in an old box, alongside a torn photo of Junior, his face partially scratched out from rage and regret. He had tried to move on. He even approached a few former friends for help, but none returned his calls. Some didn't recognize him. Others refused to be associated with the scandal. One afternoon, while walking past a school, he heard a child call out "Daddy," and turned instinctively, only to see a stranger embrace his daughter. That moment broke something deeper in him. The reality he denied had swallowed him whole. Damien began visiting the old compound from time to time, standing across the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of Amaka or Junior. But the gates were always closed, the guards instructed to report his presence. Eventually, even those visits stopped. The last known sighting of him came from a food vendor who said he bought akara and bread on credit and mumbled something about a woman who stole his life. People whispered he had gone mad. Others said he left Nigeria. But the truth was simpler. Damien didn't disappear. The world moved on without him. His legacy had been redefined. He was no longer a tycoon or a success story. He was a cautionary tale told in quiet rooms by women who survived men like him. And Amaka? She never spoke his name again. Not out of hate, but because some names are no longer worth repeating. Back in Abuja, the sun was setting as Amaka tucked Junior into bed. He clutched his teddy bear, looking up at her with sleepy eyes. "Tell me a story," he whispered. She sat beside him and began. "Once upon a time, there was a woman who was strong even when no one believed in her." He smiled, his eyes slowly closing. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "You were born from pain, but you are being raised in love." As she stood up and turned off the light, she paused at the doorway, staring at him, the child who had changed her world. She stepped outside to find Tund waiting with a cup of tea and a quiet smile. They sat on the veranda together, no words needed. Just breath, just presence, just peace. The stars twinkled above them, and somewhere far away, in a city that once broke her, the last echo of her old life faded into silence. She didn't need revenge anymore. She had what mattered most: her voice, her son, and her freedom. The end. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.